Welcome to Post-it Note University by Petra Coach. This is Coach Rob Simons, and I'm really excited about the subject I'm going to present today. This is a really powerful concept that can be used in any business. So the question to set it up is, what is the most important resource of all organizations? Give you a second to think about it. If you said people, you got it right. How often have you heard a phrase, like Andy Bailey likes to say, if you want to grow your company, you have to grow your people. Our people are our most valuable resource. I've heard all these cliches before, but finally I'm going to introduce a concept so you have a target, a metric to be able to measure how well are we doing as an organization to grow our people, make them more productive, put them in a situation where they can add more value to our product or service. This concept is called the labor efficiency ratio, or LER. It was developed by Greg Crabtree. It's in the cash section of the Scaling Up book. Greg wrote about it several years ago in his book called Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits. It's a really wonderful concept for being able to measure productivity in a way that's meaningful. And so I'm going to take you through a couple of examples. This is about a 20-minute presentation. And for those of you that are panicking right now and thinking, oh my God, this is a financial thing, I don't do financial stuff, just bear with me. I'm going to show you a couple of examples. It's actually a very easy concept to implement and an even easier concept to use in your business every day. So let's start with the first key concept of LER. And that's that we have to separate our labor pool into two categories. The first category is admin and management. So basically everybody on your team that is responsible for driving the company, the management side of the company, the sales, the hiring, the ordering of materials, the management of the overhead cost. This is your management labor team. And they're also responsible for overseeing the second half, which is the direct labor team. So your direct labor team are all employees that are responsible for creating the product or service that you're selling to your customers. These are the people that are responsible for creating the value in your product or service. And so we'll take our team members. We got Bob and Sue in our admin and management team, and we've got John, Mary, Sam, and Rick in our direct labor team. This is probably the only major change you'll have to make to your accounting system. Most accounting systems right off the bat, people don't take the time to separate these two labor pools. So you may have to work with your accounting team to go back and separate this. By the way, if there's any question about a team member, if they're in management or direct labor, use the 50% rule. If at least 50% or more of their time is spent creating the product or service, put them in direct labor. We'll talk more about that later, but let's jump in to what is the LER formulas. There's two formulas. The first one is the direct LER. This is where you take gross margin. Gross margin is defined as revenue less cost of goods sold. That's all of your pass-through cost. And then you divide that by your direct labor cost. Again, don't panic if you're not a financial person. I'm going to show you a couple of examples and you'll see just how easy it is to implement this formula. The second formula is your management LER. This is slightly different because we want to measure how productive is your management team at managing the direct labor team at creating value. So we're going to take the contribution margin and divide it by the admin management labor cost. Again, don't panic. I know when you first see formulas, you're thinking, man, this is not what I want to get into, but bear with me. Let me show you two examples. The first one is widget manufacturing. So widget manufacturing, we're going to take a look at their P&L, starting with the top half. So we're going to look at revenue, less cost of goods sold, that leaves us our gross margin, and then we'll subtract out our direct labor cost, and that leaves us our contribution margin. So widget manufacturing does revenue of $10 million. They've got $5.6 million of cost of goods sold. That leaves us with a gross margin of $4.4 million. Now our direct labor cost is 1.6 million, and that leaves us with a contribution margin of 2.8. So again, the direct LER formula is simply taking the gross margin of 4.4 million and dividing by the direct labor cost, 1.6 million. That gives us a number of 2.75. At this point, don't worry about, is that a good number? Is that high? Is that low? We're not worried about benchmarks to other industries or other companies. At this point, we just want to understand, how is widget manufacturing? What is the productivity level for widget? Another way to say this is, for every dollar in direct labor cost I spend, I should get $2.75 in gross margin. Again, we're measuring the productivity. Another really important part on this slide is, when you're looking at contribution margin, if you're not really financially savvy, don't enjoy getting into the numbers, this is a great number, because the contribution margin is basically, that's the value that we're adding to the product or service. So when we take out all the pass-through costs, the materials, and we take out the labor cost, the 2.8 million is really the value we're creating. Our direct labor team, through the use of processes and training and experience and the facilities and equipment that we've put together, they're making $2.8 million in value. All right, so let's look at the bottom half of the P&L. Our expenses are broken into 4 basic categories: facilities, marketing, admin, management, labor, and then other expenses. After we take out all the expenses from contribution margin, we're left with our net income. So again, for widget manufacturing, we can see our bottom half of our P&L here, and we have $800,000 in admin management labor. We can see our contribution margin is 2.8 million, and again, the formula is 2.8 million divided by 800,000. Our admin management LER is 3.5. Again, we don't want to worry about comparisons. I'm going to show you in just a minute 5 or 6 ways that we can use the LER in our management day-to-day decisions. All right, so let's look at our other company, Nickel and Dime Accounting, which is a service-based company. I'm going to use the same basic P&L format, and you can see that they're a slightly smaller company as far as revenue. They're doing 2.6 million. Cost of goods sold is 350,000. They actually outsource their bookkeeping, so they don't have to worry about bookkeepers. And that leaves a gross margin of 2.25 million. They have direct labor cost of 1 million, which is going to make it easy to calculate the direct LER. 2.25 million divided by 1, and we're left with 2.25. So again, let's look at the bottom half of the P&L, and you can see that our admin management labor is at $300,000. And so if we take contribution margin of 1.25 and we divide it by 300,000, we're left with 4.17. All right, so now that we've got these numbers, what the heck do we do with them, right? I'm sure you're all thinking that. So let's go back to widget manufacturing. They've got the direct LER of 2.75. They've got the management LER of 3.5. Anytime I'm implementing LER with a client, the first thing I want to do is have them go back and look at historical data. We want to see what are some of the norms for the past, and then we can see where we're at today and where do we need to make adjustments. So because widget manufacturing is a pretty stable business, consistent history, we just pulled the last 4 quarters to be able to see, is there a story behind the direct LER and management LER as it relates to their net profit. So we're looking at these numbers and we're deciding what is the story behind it. Now, one of the things about LER is it takes using it over a long period of time to really start understanding the trends and nuances of your number. Again, it's not as important how you compare to other industries or other companies. It's really, we just want to have a benchmark so we understand where are we at today and what are the changes we need to make moving forward. So we can see that our direct LER has been as high as a 2.89 and as low as a 2.5. Our management LER has had a larger range, anywhere from 3.3 to 4.67, but you've got to look at the net profit and understand what is the story that we're reading. Typically, when you see a direct LER going too low, that means we're losing money, and we either need to get more work for the team or we need to make some changes to the team. It could be that we need to reduce cost in some form or fashion. When we see the direct LER going too high, typically we're overworking our team. If the number's too high, it's kind of like running red line on your engine. You're making your people work too hard for the dollars, and it may be time to increase your staff. Same thing with management. You can start seeing trends. Do we have too much overhead labor, or do we not have enough? Once we have this information, we're going to use the LER triangle as our filter to decide what to do about it. So for example, we have a 2.75 direct LER today. What happens if that number goes down dramatically? What caused it? Well, there could be a number of factors. It could be a number of contributing factors. We use this LER triangle to remind, as the filter, to look at where are the possible areas that affect LER. The first on the top of the triangle is people. Do we have the right team? Do our team members need more training? Do we possibly have a disengaged member on our team that's bringing everybody else down? Are we overstaffed, understaffed? There's lots of things about the people factor that come into play on the LER. The second, going clockwise, is the execution portion of scaling up. Are there processes or systems that aren't running as efficiently as they should be? Do we have some communication problems within the organization? Are we not following our own rhythms? And then finally, there's the strategy component that affects LER. This may seem a little bit more abstract, but let's start with your core customer. Is it possible that you're selling to the wrong customer? If we identify who is the ideal customer for us that appreciates our brand promise, we'll be able to get a higher price, thus increasing our LER. So you always want to look at the strategy component to see, are we doing the right things to improve our LER? One other thing that Widget Manufacturing did, which is another lens of LER, is they run 3 shifts. So the accounting department pulled the LER per shift. And you can see that the 3rd shift has a significantly lower LER. And so the question is, what's going on in shift 3 that we can't get the same type of productivity levels as we are on shift 1 or shift 2? Again, I'd go back to the people, execution, and strategy filters as my starting point to diagnose the problem. Is it a manager problem? Is it a team member problem? Is it a execution problem? There could be many things that are impacting it. But the LER tool gives us a way to measure and identify where is there a bottleneck or an issue. Let's look at another example. We're going to go back to nickel and dime accounting with their 2.25 LER and their 4.17 management LER. Now, one of the big differences between nickel and dime and widget manufacturing is that we all know that the accounting business is highly seasonal. They're very busy January, February, March, and April preparing tax returns. And so that can throw your LER out of whack when you're looking at historical data. Looking at the LER in August and comparing it to the LER in April doesn't really do you a lot of good. We know that they're super busy in April, and August is typically a slow time. So what do we do about that? For seasonal businesses, we always look at the LER on a rolling 12. What's a rolling 12? We basically always look at the last 12 months. So it's kind of like always looking at a year, and whatever month we're in is the last month. Another way to think about this is when we're going into March, as a company, our goal is to outperform whatever we did a year ago in March. So the rolling 12 takes out the seasonality. For nickel and dime accounting, they pulled rolling 12s for the last 12 months. And again, we can start seeing some stories in the data. Over time, you'll be able to read the numbers even more intricately. But for example, in March, they had a very low net income number, and it looks like it was probably related to really low direct labor, which could mean a lot of different things. Again, you're going to always go back and look at the people, execution, and strategy filter to determine where's the problem, what do we need to work on. Also remember, like most numbers in business, you're going to have, there's not a direct path to go from point A to point B. You're always going to have some highs and lows along the journey. Just keep that in mind as you're managing your LER. So one other example from nickel and dime accounting, they're a service-based industry, so they record their time by the hour, and it's directly applied to the client invoice, which allows us to do some other types of analysis. Greg calls this the LER Cube. We're looking at the LER data from different angles. The first angle we're going to look at is we're going to look at direct LER by team member. For every dollar we pay Mary, we're getting $2.25 in gross margin. For John, we're getting $2.50. For Rick, $2.15. And Sam is just knocking it out of the park with a $2.75. And so as a manager, I would look at this data and use it as a way to identify where do I need to put my attention. The first thing I'd want to understand is why is Rick so low compared to his other team members? Does he need additional training? Does he not have the right equipment? Are there some other problems? Or maybe he's just getting the wrong type of work. I'd also want to know, how is Sam getting a 2.75? He's doing a great job. He's our most productive employee. It would also make me wonder, if he's been doing this for a long period of time, it's probably also an indication that Sam is ready for a raise. This is an incredible tool to use in your top grading scorecards. So when you hire team members, you can put the expectations out up front of what is the productivity numbers that we expect. Another way to look at the LER data is by customer. We can analyze based on the invoiced and paid amounts versus the labor cost involved, what is the LER by customer. In this example, we can see that Wilson Sports is doing great, $3.20 direct LER, which means we're getting very profitable on that particular account. But if we look at Flip Burger, it's only at a meager $1.55. And that raises some serious questions. Based on my past experience, at $1.55, we're probably losing money on Flip Burger. So again, as the executive team, we'd want to do our analysis and determine, is this just the wrong customer? Do we have the wrong team members? Was it underquoted? There's so many factors that it could be, but at least now we have a way of being able to shine a light on it and determine how to fix it moving forward. In my business, I did this every year, and we always analyzed the customers and then had an action plan moving forward. And then the final analysis that nickel and dime accounting is doing is they're looking at their LER by project type. So they do 3 types of services. They do tax returns, audit, and consulting. And you can see for the tax returns, they're only getting a 1.8 LER, which is pretty low, but it's a commodity work. It's a high volume work. So that kind of makes sense. Audit, they're getting a 2.15, but consulting, they're getting a 2.75. So as an executive team, I'd want to do everything I could to get more consulting work because that's where we're getting our biggest return on our labor cost. Now, after we did the analysis, we learned that the tax return clients are typically where we get our consulting clients. So we can't get rid of the tax return work because that's kind of our loss leader to be able to identify our consulting clients. Again, there's always a story behind the number. So let's look at one last advanced use of LER. And this is actually the most interesting because it's a what-if scenario. So we're going to go back to Widget Manufacturing, and I'm going to pull up their P&L. And this time, the executive team is feeling pretty good. They feel like things are going great, and they've decided that they want to hire a new salesperson. And so they're going to spend $100,000 on a new salesperson. And we could use the LER factors, the ratios, to be able to determine the impact on the entire organization. So if we're going to add $100,000 in admin and management labor, that's going to go from $800,000 to $900,000. Well, now we can also make the calculation on what is the increase we need to see in contribution margin. It's basically taking the $100,000 and multiplying it times the management LER. So we're going to have to add $350,000 in contribution margin. So contribution margin will go from $2.8 million to $3.15 million. Likewise, we can keep going up the list here. If we know our contribution margin is going to be $3.15 million, and we know our direct LER needs to be in the 2.75 range, we need to increase our gross margin by $550,000, up to $4.95 million. Once again, this leads to another simple calculation. That means we're going to have an additional $200,000 in direct labor at a 2.75 to be able to handle all that new work. And if we do the factors, the same percentage for cost of goods sold, we can now factor in that we're going to have to add $1.125 million in sales in order to be able to hit the new gross margin number. So you can see by adding a $100,000 salesman, we're actually having to increase sales by $1.125 million, which gives us a convenient goal to give our new salesman. He needs to hit $1.125 million in revenue, and we know we're going to have to add another $200,000 in direct labor cost to keep the same direct LER and management LER, which will ultimately give us a new net income of $690,000. Again, having these ratios and having some historical perspective gives you a great tool for doing what-if scenarios. Well, that's it for direct LER. Just to recap the labor efficiency ratio, there's two formulas. There's the direct LER, gross margin divided by direct labor cost. We have the management LER, which is contribution margin divided by admin management labor cost. Remember to always use the LER triangle. Always look at it from the filter of people, execution, and strategy. And then finally, Greg keeps a really good website at simplenumbers.me. And at that site, you'll find more case studies and some spreadsheets and some more resources on the LER. Of course, you can also always contact your Petra coach, and we'll help you with LER and implementation, just like the rest of the Rockefeller habits. I appreciate you spending this time with me. I hope you found it helpful. Please send us some feedback on the Post-it Note University, and we'll certainly do more. Stay focused and make it a great day.